Race has been identified as being a social construct. Social meaning it's about relationships. A construct meaning that is not does not exist in nature. Animals don't practice racism. So it begs the question, why was race created? I believe it's important to set some context for my perspective, where I believe that the work needs to be done. I am a displaced heritage person. My African and indigenous ancestors were not on this continent because they were seeking freedom to express their faith, to escape an oppressive government, or to gain wealth from education or commodity. So I struggle to reconcile my African heritage to be in solidarity with my indigenous roots. There are different aspects of unfinished business. While some were heralded as settlers, my ancestors lived a bifurcated experience of freedom. Some gains and some great losses. And I've heard the stories of indigenous persons younger than myself that were separated from their families because of their race. So I struggle as a person of faith to reconcile my faith with the aspirations of the national narratives. A divine narrative which holds all people as of sacred worth versus a national narrative that defines people based upon the Constitution and their economic value. One narrative promotes healing and harmony and sustainability. The other, unsustainability and the ability to exploit other people. And there have also been people of faith that have chosen the national narratives over the divine narratives, and others who have not. In the past, to the criminal justice system, exploitable people were used to build and finance our infrastructure and many others, which we still benefit from today. So I understand race as a social construct used to acquire and preserve wealth. Economics is a complex system, and so is race. And working toward its elimination requires a disciplined approach like any other subject. As I alluded to earlier, there are national narratives that have caused trauma and the unfinished businesses needed to correct them. There are institutional and business narratives. Local, a narrative of story. And these stories can be manifested as behaviors, laws, policies, religious practices, prejudices, food availability, media, family values. You'll need to identify the values embedded in those narratives and their intended meanings. Another location in anti-racism is maturity in doing the work. Race is experienced differently, depending upon your ethnic and cultural heritage, and other factors such as gender, appearance, status, and wealth, and many others. These can influence your level of engagement. There are different stages of ally engagement and skills needed to do the work. I'll suggest 4 stages: social, intellectual, practical, and living. A social ally is someone that wants to be perceived as a good person. They listen and express sympathy for the cause. An intellectual ally is someone who wants to learn more and is willing to gain more information. I will conclude with some wisdom for personal conversations. First, it is your responsibility to gain do as much research and gain as much information as you can before seeking out a person of color to answer your questions. The good intentions behind your words may have a negative impact upon your listener. Realize that for a person of color to share from their experiences, they may need to remember some deep traumas from their past, those buried memories and emotions. So it's best to engage from a place of consideration and curiosity. And as you listen, don't interrupt to share your own experience or sense of equivalency. Such interruptions can be perceived as an attempt to engage or to minimize what has been shared. So, you want to be an ally? With honesty, know yourself and learn as much as you can. Know your reasons for engaging in this work and have an awareness of what you can do. There are various organizations that are committed to doing this work, and there is strength in numbers. So join them. We have been socialized into a racist system for most of our American lives. Race is complex, and reading one book or taking one class is not going to erase all the ways that you have been influenced. But take heart. Your willingness to step in this direction will help. And remember, your small steps will aggregate into large and greater change. Thank you.
So I'm Kristin Ang. I am the Port Tacoma Commissioner and the managing member of the Northwest Seaport Alliance. It's one of the largest gateways of trade in North America. I'm also the policy director for Faith Action Network, which is a statewide multi-faith coalition that advocates for a just and compassionate world, starting so that communities can take courageous action and advocate on the local, state, and even federal level. I think the reason why I'm probably unique as a port commissioner, especially in Port Tacoma, some people define it as like, you are the first person of color to be on that commission in over 100 years of existence. We also had the historical endorsement of the Puyallup Tribe of Indians, and that was their land since time immemorial. So that was kind of groundbreaking on how I got to the commission. It's also the platform that I ran on besides the usual economic development. It was about environmental justice, inclusion, tribal sovereignty, what kind of economic development we wanted to have for our community, and to talk about who's at the table and who do these investments benefit? How will we really move forward as a community, and who sits at these seats of power and money? Let's just be serious. I mean, if I take a look at, and people think, well, why the port? I was like, well, because the ports are engines of global commerce. And we've talked about economics and how race was really constructed because of economics, capitalism, and how it is the system that created it, all the way from faith, religious, I should say, like with the Catholics' doctrine of discovery, saying it was okay to go to other places in the world to justify colonialism, to say it's okay to say that you discovered this, to claim it, and then to subjugate the people that live there for your own economic benefit. People say you can be colorblind or whatnot. I was like, sure, I treat people, but you can't really say you don't see color because they made us see color. Like, we grew up in this era. People treat me differently because of it. So it's not that. It was actually the ideas more than sometimes my face that scared people. Scared the powers that be in the establishment before they saw that I could actually bring in economic development.
And I do want to throw it out there about the Washington Health Disparities Map.
You will see the different zip codes, and it will tell you who absorbs our pollution, what is the life expectancy in certain zip codes, what are the demographics of their unemployment, cost of housing, opportunities. It will show you how redlining really did happen and what's the long-lasting effects even to this day, and why past is not past, because we have the effects of today. And if we want to change that, we can't simply just do status quo, because you are perpetuating inequities. So you must disrupt the system while you're in the system. I'm just gonna say, you do have to actually work this system to actually change it still. So for me, I do still look at it as an environmental justice lens. With the ports, I take a look at it as like the intersection of transportation and environmental leadership, which is a new thing. I don't know why it's new, because it always should have been there. why should different people of color come together and those who feel something? Because it's gonna take a lot of us, you know, it's solidarity. Like they often say, like, if you have a system, you have a machine, how do you stop it? Well, that is a movement. You need a lot of people, and you do need to know about the histories, about what people, it is about the connections, the relationships. Oftentimes, you know, they do say there's this familiar rhymes of our histories of injustice. The verses may be different, but we know the song, right? And whether that's the transatlantic slave trade, the Chinese Exclusion Act, the displacement of Native people like the Trail of Tears, in which we simply took the land in the South and then we put slave labor there and built some of our economic wealth as a country. Some people don't know that. How did we become this powerful? And some people don't want to know that because it's not the best thing about us. But we have to, if we want to reconcile and be a better country, be a stronger country, we do need to know about our histories. Coming from a faith background, I like to think about it both ways. There's like the sins of the father. And then also, I also think there's the goodness that you can pass down and you can break those cycles and you can plant those seeds. And, you know, with the tribal kind of mind frame, you can learn from different communities about 7 generations, the way you make decisions, the way you think. So we can all learn from each other. So if we do learn from each other, the history, we have deep wisdom, deep connections, and that's actually empowers all of us to act. And we do have a shared responsibility to each other. And the only way to make that kind of impact, to fight back, is to have shared action and to have each other's back. That is the only why I probably won my seat. It wasn't because of just my platform. People said you showed up for something completely different. It wasn't the support, but you showed up for me, and that's why I voted for you. Even though someone else had a similar platform, they didn't vote for them because they never saw them. So we have to show up for each other. It really is that simple. You know, being pitted against one another for scraps, when really we should be thinking universal dignity, a minimum of how to be treated, of what we want in this country and how we want to.
People in the environmental world take a look at the health of the orca and salmon as a barometer of their health, not just their health, but the environment's health and what's ultimately going to come back to you. But if you see a person or a community that's being hurt, or the way they are, or how their conditions, just know it's easier to slide down to that than it is for you to be a billionaire. I'm just going to say, like, you need to protect yourself, and the best way is to have the best minimum. I often say, if some house is on fire, you better hose that down because it'll burn everything else. A lot of people wonder, like, why Black Lives Matter? You're not Black. Well, because I'm going to tell you how they treat Black people is how they're going to treat Asian people, how they're going to treat women, how they're going to treat you when you don't have a certain, even white men. I'm just going to say that's how they're going to treat you too. You got to think about that. That's like, and if they have Asian hate, I tell people, like, especially different faith communities, like, they can't tell the difference. White supremacy cannot tell the difference between some of you, whether you're, you know, Muslim or Jewish. Some people just want to take you out. And for the Asians who sometimes have a thing against each other, they can't tell the difference either. They don't like Asians. So you got to have to combat that too. So it is about, in a way, dismantling systems, but I would say you have to know about the systems.
And you do have to have, the only way to do that really is connecting with your fellow people. It really is to understand their struggles as well. And that actually will make you stronger and actually uplift you. I think there's a spiritual connection, or inside us, if you don't believe that, there's a heart. And also it does create a muscle within you. And I think it uplifts you to be kind of bonded to your community, to your fellow people, because you can't do this alone.
Hold yourself accountable, right? Be willing to confront your own biases. Being raised by a white mother in this society in Washington, I have a lot of internalized depression, right? One day I came home from work and I walked past the mirror and I scared myself. I literally scared myself because I saw what you see now. I forgot that I wasn't white. But because I was in an environment with that's all the faces that I saw day in and day out, I forgot I wasn't white. And because I had a code switch, right? Code switch into what do I need to do and how do I fit in when I'm functioning in the office. It wasn't the full version of me. It wasn't my authentic self, right? Code switch into what society needed of me in that moment. Listen actively is your next tip. Listen actively and believe people when they share their stories, right? Don't interrupt, don't interject. Don't try and tie in your stuff. Boy, I have that problem too. If you catch me doing that with you, just say, hold up, Denise, you're doing the very thing you don't like people to do to you, right? Give them the space. Everybody else, you all have had your time, right? I'm putting the people on notice today. Engage in difficult conversations. Be willing to be vulnerable and be honest, right? And you don't have to say, this is another thing. If you need to look up white fragility after this, please do. Don't come up to me afterwards with tears in your eyes and say, oh, I just realized that I'm just so off track with this, and I realize I'm part of the problem, and I'm not going to cry with you. I'm not going to give you a hug. You're going to say she was cold and unempathetic. Yes, because I'm not going to cry when you realize that you've been racist, right? Don't put that burden. I'm not going to bear the emotional labor of that. Okay. Support restorative justice efforts. And if you're unfamiliar with what restorative justice efforts look like, again, Google it, right? There's so much information on the web. When I was in IT, the help desk would say, let me Google that for you. People would come over, ask a question. They're like, oh, okay, let me Google that for you. Like, you couldn't look it up yourself. Amplify voices of marginalized groups, advocate for policies that promote racial equity and justice, and build inclusive communities. And this is the last thing I'm going to leave with you. Carol, can you raise your hand, Carol? This is my friend Carol over here, Legal Women Voters. Carol is on the forefront of anti-racism work. I don't know if you can see her cape, but she is a powerhouse of a woman, right? Don't get it twisted. Don't let the gray hair fool you, because she is all about it. Carol convened a group of concerned citizens, and on May 10th, we have a DEI summit for Thurston County. So you're all invited. We got to save the date. Oh, you got the flyer. Oh, yeah, thank you. So.
This is my cake. Good. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So in conclusion, by choosing love-driven justice, we open up the possibility of real, meaningful transformation, both within ourselves and our communities, right? It's about moving away from divisiveness and punishment towards unity, healing, and reconciliation. It's an invitation to listen, learn, and act in ways that support racial equity. And by embracing these concepts, we can create a world where everyone can live with dignity and the harmful social construct of race is dismantled. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. My name is Fernando Mejia Ledesma, Hihimel, and thank you for inviting me into this space. I am with an organization called the Alliance for a Just Society, and we manage the Communities for Our Colleges Coalition. That's where I had the privilege to connect with Kelsey, but also Caitlin over the years. Our focus is on increasing access to higher education with a focus on organizing the community and technical college students, because when you think of equity issues within higher education, Washington State, the majority of the students that go into higher education begin with community and technical colleges. but historically, the system has been underfunded, and as a result of that, it has unintendedly exacerbated the racial disparities. So that's a little bit about just the current work that I'm doing right now. But let me step back a little bit. I'm gonna speak a little bit about myself, and then I'm gonna come back into some of this work. Um, just to make sure that I keep track of the time. I know we're a little bit late. Do I have about 10 minutes? Is that right? 10, 15 minutes? 10 minutes?
15 minutes. We'll push it back a little bit for the group report time. We can reduce that a little bit.
Perfect. I'll try to keep it within 10 minutes. Um,
Thank
the other thing that I wanted to say before I continue, I just want to say thank you for the flexibility. I wanted to be with all of you in person, but my wife is expecting, and we are gonna go to the hospital anytime between today or tomorrow. I was not able to make it in person, but I really wanted to be there. Just, I wanted to be there because, one of the things that we need to be doing today in these difficult political moments is to build solidarity between our communities, because that is the power that we need to build if we not only want to continue defending some of the progresses that our communities have made, but at the same time, how do we push for more? Because at the end of the day, as we are discussing today, we live in a highly structured society that some of the principles behind the structures of society are one of racialized dynamics. Um, and so anyway, so I wanted to be here, but again, thank you for the flexibility. So let me begin with saying that I was born and raised in Mexico, as Lynn mentioned. I moved to the States back in 2001, right after 9/11. As many of you might remember, there were also challenging political times around that time. Um, so I came at the age of 16. I came like many immigrants coming from Latin America. I came without documents. I crossed the Arizona-Mexico border, um, and it took me 2 days and 2 nights. This is back in November of 2001. So this is right after 9/11. It was a really challenging experience. I was walking away from growing up in a place with a lot of violence. I do want to emphasize that, sometimes when we talk about our countries, especially the global south, many times we talk about the violence, despair that we're escaping, and there's a lot of reality to that. But my country, like many of your countries and our ancestral lands, they're very complicated, right? And so I elevate this because I don't want to continue painting the picture that Mexico is just the worst place to be living in. Now, where I grew up, it was hard. It was really, really difficult. There was a lot of drugs coming into my community. I was 16 at the time, and I was getting recruited by, people who wanted me to sell drugs, but I did not want to do that. So at the time, the only choice that I had was to leave, and so I left. So when I was leaving, as I was coming to this country, something really amazing happened to me, if you want to call it that way. As I was walking across the desert, in November in the Arizona desert, the sky can be really beautiful, very beautiful. In the middle of the night, there's thousands of stars, millions of stars. The sky is so clean. So one thing that happened, I look up in the sky, was not allowed to speak because we were afraid of getting caught by the border patrol, and so we couldn't speak. So I was walking, I look up in the sky, and then there's a falling star. Boom, shoo. And I'm like, okay, I gotta make a wish. And so I was like, okay, my wish is I'm not gonna die. I'm not gonna die. I'm not gonna die dehydrated. So I told that to myself multiple times. As I was walking with my gallon of water and across the border. I was like, I'm not gonna die. And then there was another star. Um, I was like, okay, I gotta make another wish. And so then I was like, okay, if I make it, I'm gonna go to school. If I make it, I'm gonna go to school. And so I shared this because those wishes kind of became foundational of who I eventually became. 2 years later, I was finding myself going to college in Idaho, Boise State University. But before that, something really interesting happened. Um, Someone asked me to speak at a press conference, and they were like, "Hey, Fernando, can you share a little bit about, your story?" And we're talking about the DREAM Act. This would allow undocumented youth to go to college throughout the country, blah, blah, blah. And so I was like, yes, I got to jump into this thing because I want to go to college. So this is back in 2004, April of 2004. And so here I go. I share my story, and then the next day, my face was in all of the newspapers and TV in Idaho, which is not that many, but it was really scary because, as some of you have said, and maybe some of you also have experienced, Idaho, politically speaking, is very conservative, culturally very conservative, and so I was really afraid. But but what happened was that out of that experience became also very foundational for the next for me, because for the next 20 years I basically ended up dedicating myself to community organizing. So that experience, one of the things that it tells me is that organizations like your organization are really important, because many times organizations provide the space for people like myself who might come from a very disenfranchised status, might be undocumented, or we come from communities of color. So community organizations can play a pivotal role in creating bridges between our communities and the changes that we need to be making. And so that was just an example of what it meant to work with an organization that was creating those spaces. And so then for the next 20 years, I've ended up joining the immigrant rights movement at the state, but also the national level. I became a youth leader within the Fight for the Dream Act, which I think many of you might be familiar, but basically it increases access to higher education for undocumented students with a path to citizenship. So that was the fight at the national level. And then I joined the larger fight for immigrant rights. I don't know if some of you might remember, but back in 2006, there were massive mass mobilizations fighting against the criminalization of immigrants in Congress, and that basically launched the next iteration of the immigrant rights movement. And so I had the privilege to be part of the national campaign. I began getting exposed to what it meant to organize with other communities, and how do we build power so we can achieve social change. Um, and since then, I work on a multiplicity of different campaigns, including the access to healthcare, transportation, environmental justice, um, and then most recently, higher education. Um, I say some of these things because, as we have been discussing, race, it is definitely a social construct. And there's a lot of terminology within the racial justice that I learned through the years. And through the years, we put them into practice. And so at the time when I got involved, I didn't have an understanding about why leading with race was important. And so when I was trained back in the mid 2000s, I was trained with the understanding that whenever we would talk about race, we have to be really thoughtful as to the distinction, the different levels of racism. So part of our framework that we use within my work is, and the way we talk about race, we try to keep it as simple as possible, with the assumption of, like, many people come from different spaces, they have been socialized within different contexts, and they have a lot of different ideas about the very meaning of race. Um, and so, if we really want to build power, we need to build, solidarity. And how do we do that? By, building trust. And how do we do that? As many of you have said, we have to be listening to each other with the goal of transcending whatever misconception we might have about each other into a different conception about, that allow us to come together to continue building power and using that as a way to achieve the systematic changes that we wanna make. And so when we talk about race, we talk about two key distinctions within my framework. One is that we talk about the systemic structural, which we call that the macro level, the big picture level in some ways. And then that we talk about the personal and interpersonal. So that's at the micro level. And so we try to make a distinction about that, because our work, we believe that we need to be focusing on the macro level. Many times, you know, um, our conversations um, take on a personal level, and interpersonal level. The things that I believe, where those beliefs coming from, and how I act on those beliefs. And so that is the personal level. But then at the interpersonal level, then we talk about how what I believe about race, um, um, you know, influences the way that I interact with other people, right? And so you can see a lot of tension sometimes happening in our communities when we are talking about whether someone is being racist or not being racist. The challenge with that is that many times we get stuck in that space and we don't really start thinking or practicing how do we make systematic changes. And because at the end of the day, all of the ideas that we have, they're rooted, they come from a place or a different place, and they're reinforced through our institutions, our practices, our culture. And so my work has always been focusing on, like, how do I begin establishing a conversation about race, and through that I begin cultivating a relationship with someone that could potentially become a member into one of the campaigns that I might be running. And so many times the conversation begins at the personal level, but then we have to build a bridge between the personal and the macro, the institutional, systemic, structural changes that we need to be making. And so let me just give you an example. So back in the 2020, I was tasked with the goal of building, um, organizing with community and technical colleges. My organization identified some of the challenges that students were facing when it came to, wanting to go to college, but also engaging with community and technical colleges. So one of the things that we realize is that, here in Washington State, when we talk about college, many times we just talk about UW, the four-year colleges, and many times we don't really talk about the two-year colleges because people either they feel because there's a stigma around community and technical colleges. Um, and so that stigma has also policy impacts because when you don't see something a public good, when you see it from a kind of condescending way, that impacts the way that you relate to it. And so culturally speaking, politically speaking, one of the results of that is that there's not a lot of emphasis into our community colleges and the pivotal role that they play throughout the state. And so I was tasked with the idea of organizing community and technical college students. And so I was really excited about doing this, but then we were facing a challenge, the challenge of the pandemic. So this is March of 2020. And so my plan back then was to go and meet with a lot of students, meet them where they are, identify the challenges they're facing, and then bring them together. But then everything was shutting down, and so it was really challenging to do that. And so what I ended up doing, I just basically reached out to people that I knew, and then they began connecting me with different people throughout the state. Once I had enough people, then I brought them together and began facilitating conversations about, like, okay, what are the changes that we need to make, um, given the challenges that you're facing right now. And so the big challenge at the time was the pandemic. And so the question was, as a student, how is the pandemic impacting you and what are the solutions, right? I mean, there were a lot of other conversations, there were other questions that we were asking, but that was kind of the essence of the conversation that we were having. And so as I was engaging with students and then bringing together potential coalition members, we began pushing that conversation about like, okay, what is it that we need to change? And then the second major thing that happened in 2020 were the racial uprisings. So it was a political crisis, which basically was, elevating the crisis that our communities have already been facing, right? And so we have this political crisis. And so from an organizing perspective, when you have a crisis, it's not only, a crisis, it is also an opportunity. And so knowing that the pandemic was evolving, the impact that it was having with specifically with communities of color, and then we were having this deeper conversation throughout the country about racial justice, we saw a moment, and we saw momentum. And so we came together with the idea of like, okay, how do we have an opportunity to be really bold and make systematic changes. And so, as we were engaging with students, we identified a set of issues. And so then we tried to transcribe those set of issues into giving us momentum to make systematic changes. So we came up with an idea of making those substantial changes through legislative action. And so our students were involved not only developing the concept of the problem, but also the solution, but also they were also involved in drafting legislation themselves. I know there's a lot of access here in Washington State, but that experience was really unique because what we were trying to do with students was basically to put the terms of the legislation in their own hands. And so that in itself, the way that we were describing it, that's a reflection of the type of direct democracy that we want to see. We want people not only to have a voice at the table, but we want their voice to be leading and to be deciding how those decisions are going to be impacting them. So that was kind of the beginning of an exercise around the very essence of democracy, the type of democracy that we believe in, which is not just representative democracy, that I go and talk to an elected official, but rather that democracy is a little bit more fluid, that the people have to be represented in those spaces, that yes, we have to elect someone that looks like me and might reflect my values, but at the end of the day, if we want to keep accountability between elected officials and our communities, we have to be in that space. So that was kind of part of the essence of, behind the founding of communities for our colleges. And so since 2020, we've been able to pass almost every year a statewide policy that increases access to mental health for students, increases the number of faculty positions at community colleges. We help create, with other organizations, benefit hubs at many community colleges, but also all the four-year colleges. We did that with another partners, our partners. We also change, increase access to working connections childcare for undocumented students. We changed residency requirements for undocumented students too. And most recently, we expanded professional licensure to everyone, regardless of status. And so I share a lot of these things because, uh, you know, many times our conversation around race can be intellectually stimulating, but as someone earlier said, you know, there's the conversation, the intellectual stimulation, but what we need to make change. And so the last thing that I'll say is that that is kind of the spirit behind the work that we do. We definitely try to, capture what the political community is saying about the changes that we need to be making, but we emphasize the people that are impacted. We and we take a little bit of an extra step. One is definitely to tell their story, but at the same time, not only sharing that story, but also we want to be the deciders. And so, what I'm trying to say is that in this challenging political times, one of the invitations that we're making is that, things are a little bit shaky. And there's a lot of concern. But I think this is the moment that we need to step in and to begin building a vision for how our voices are going to be leading, um, um, as we continue to fight for justice. So, with that, I'm going to pass it back to our facilitators. Thank you very much.